All right, let's dive right into this explainer and explore the awe-inspiring, unseen biological clockwork that actually makes human life possible. When we think about how life begins, it's so easy to just focus on the big picture. But underneath all of that, there is a microscopic, perfectly timed cellular symphony going on. I absolutely love this sports quote because it hits the nail on the head. Timing really is everything. Just like a perfectly executed pass on a football field, human biology relies on these chemical coaches called hormones. They use all these complex feedback loops to call the plays, making sure every single microscopic process happens at exactly the right time in the exact right order. So here is our game plan for today. First, we'll look at the master biological clock, then the female reproductive cycle, followed by sperm production and anatomy. After that, we'll dive into the actual process of fertilization. And finally, we'll cover what happens when things go wrong with infertility and STDs. Section 1. The master biological clock, the female reproductive cycle. Okay, to really grasp this master clockwork, let's look at how the female body orchestrates its monthly cycle of hormones and cellular development. This whole thing is controlled by the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the ovaries. But here's the wild part. Unlike guys, females actually start producing eggs before they are even born. Through a process of cell division called meiosis, these potential eggs start developing, but then they just kind of pause. They're arrested in that stage until puberty. So at birth, a female has about 2 million of these partially developed eggs. But before puberty even kicks in, the vast majority break down, leaving roughly 400,000. And that brings us to the famous 28-day menstrual cycle that kicks off at puberty. It's literally driven by a continuous loop of rising and falling hormones. On day 1, the flow phase begins, where the uterine lining or endometrium sheds. By day 6, we're into the follicular phase. Brain hormones known as FSH and LH start to spike, which matures a new egg and its surrounding follicle. As that follicle grows, it pumps out estrogen, which tells the uterus to thicken that lining back up to prep for a potential pregnancy. Right around day 14, we hit the climax of the cycle. That rising estrogen triggers a massive spike in LH, and this causes the follicle to literally rupture, releasing the mature egg right out of the ovary. We call that ovulation. The egg then gets swept into the fallopian tube, starting a 5 to 7 day journey toward the uterus. To put it in perspective, over a woman's entire reproductive life, only about 400 to 500 eggs will ever actually be released like this. Now, this clockwork doesn't run forever, obviously. As a woman ages, those hormone levels naturally start to drop off. And that decline, it totally disrupts that perfect 28-day rhythm we just talked about. The cycle gets irregular and eventually stops completely. That's menopause, and while it usually happens later in life, it can actually begin as early as a woman's mid-30s. Section 2. The second clock. Sperm production and anatomy. All right, so we've got a handle on the monthly female cycle. Now let's flip over to the male biological timeline, which honestly operates on a drastically different schedule. It's a crazy contrast. A female typically releases just one single egg per month, a few hundred her whole life. But male biology, it is all about sheer volume. We're talking millions of sperm produced continuously, starting at puberty. But just like the female cycle, this continuous factory is heavily regulated by a hormonal feedback loop. The hypothalamus tells the pituitary gland to release our brain hormones, FSH and LH, which travel down to the testes. That triggers the release of testosterone, causing specialized cells to undergo meiosis. But here is the key difference. Instead of making one viable egg, the male process divides one potential sperm cell into 4 equal haploid sperm cells, each packing 23 chromosomes. And as testosterone goes up, FSH and LH go down, which acts as a perfect volume control for the number of sperm being created. And man, to make that incredible journey from the male body all the way up to the fallopian tubes, these tiny cells are perfectly engineered. You've got the genetic payload packed into the head, then an energy-producing midpiece loaded with mitochondria, which is basically a microscopic cellular battery, and finally, that powerful whip-like tail or flagellum to propel the whole thing forward. Section 3. The critical moment, the process of fertilization. Okay, let's bring these two incredibly precise biological systems together and look at the main event, fertilization, which typically happens way up in the fallopian tube. 50 million to 500 million. Let that massive number sink in. That is the amount of sperm cells that can be released in just a single ejaculation. Millions of these perfectly engineered little swimmers, all racing through the uterus and up the fallopian tubes, looking for just one single egg. Now, seeing a volume that massive immediately begs a really fascinating question about biological security. If hundreds of millions of sperm reach the destination, how on earth does the body make sure that only one actually fertilizes the egg? Well, the secret is in the egg's highly protective membrane, which is covered in binding sites. When a sperm cell finally makes contact, this little cap on its head, called the acrosome, releases a highly specific enzyme. It literally digests a tiny hole in the egg's membrane just at that exact spot, letting the sperm slip inside. And the second that single sperm breaks through, boom! The egg's surface instantly changes its makeup to physically lock out every single one of those millions of competitors. So the absolute crucial point here is that this split-second synchronization brings together 23 chromosomes from the mother's egg and 23 from the father's sperm. Together, they form a brand new single cell with 46 chromosomes. It's a perfectly complete, 100% unique genetic blueprint that is now ready to develop into a new life.
Section 4. When the clockwork breaks, infertility and STDs.
Now, as much as this system is a total engineering marvel, it is also highly, highly delicate, which brings us to the real-world complications that can throw a wrench into human reproduction. We call any condition that makes reproduction difficult or impossible infertility. For males, this could be a blocked vas deferens, a low sperm count, or even an illness, like getting the mumps in adulthood can actually destroy the testes' ability to make sperm. For females, diseases might damage the ovaries or fallopian tubes, which physically stops the egg from getting to the uterus. But the good news? A lot of these structural or timing disruptions can absolutely be corrected today with modern medicine, surgery, or even just simple dietary changes. Then, of course, we have sexually transmitted diseases, or STDs, which pose a massive threat to this biological system. They affect millions of people. And, sneakily, they often don't show any symptoms at first. The source material draws a really vital line in the sand here. Bacterial infections, like chlamydia and syphilis, attack the reproductive organs and can cause severe damage, but they can be treated and cured with antibiotics. Viral infections, on the other hand, like HPV or HIV, have no cure. Antibiotics do absolutely nothing against them, meaning they can only be managed with medications for the rest of a person's life.
So protecting this master clockwork through safe practices, whether that's abstinence or committed relationship, isn't just about dodging a temporary bug. As we've seen, it's really about preserving this incredibly precise, delicate cellular symphony that we've been exploring today.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really ponder. If this level of flawless, microscopic clockwork, managed by all these chemical coaches, is happening inside us continuously just to create the potential for new life, what other unseen biological symphonies are playing out inside your cells at this exact second, just keeping you alive?